accomplish this mega project. We completed preliminary engineering, and we completed our final environmental impact statement in 2004, and we received a record of decision for the preferred alternative, which is shown. In particular, Phase 2 2nd Avenue, the project alignment for Phase 2 2nd Avenue. If you start from the left-hand side of the screen, what you see there in the green sections are those existing sections of tunnels that were constructed in the 1970s. In Phase 1, when we completed the 96th Street station, we actually utilized that first green section for what we call our tail tracks, to store some trains to feed into service when we start service from 96th Street, which is now the northernmost terminal station for Phase 1. Then there'll be a new station at 106th Street between the two existing sections of tunnel. The other existing section of tunnel was constructed between 110th and 120th Streets. A portion of that section will be rehabilitated and reconstructed for the 116th Street station. Then from the north end of that work, we will launch tunnels to go north on 2nd Avenue and eventually begin to curve and turn at around 123rd Street so that we wind up under 125th Street, where the tunnels will then proceed to the west, and we'll have a new station at 125th Street between Lexington and Park Avenues, where we'll have connections to the 4, 5, and 6 train at Lexington Avenue, and we'll have an entrance located near the Metro North Railroad at Park Avenue. Then beyond Park Avenue, we'll extend tail tracks again for train storage to be able to feed in necessary trains for service when we start morning service. Those train tracks, or those tail tracks, will extend actually beyond Lenox Avenue. So the benefits of 2nd Avenue Subway, in particular Phase 1. So far in Phase 1, we've achieved up to 190,000 riders per day, right on schedule in terms of what we anticipated ridership would be when we started planning for this. We expect on top of that 190,000, when Phase 2 goes into service, we'll add another 100,000 riders. For time savings, the average commuter is seeing up to 20 minutes a day. And that may not sound like a lot, but when you add that up, it's 7.5 hours a month almost, over 3 days a year. You know, I could think of a lot of other things I'd like to be doing than riding the subways. You know, with all with the additional time and being able to get around and increase the mobility. For accessibility, all stations, of course, will be ADA accessible. All new stations will be ADA accessible. They'll have elevators and escalators. I'll get into a little bit more about that in the future slides. For streetscape, we will leave the area better than when we got there and when we started construction. And in particular, we have modified and learned from our lessons on past mega projects and on Phase 1. We will incorporate our structures into the neighborhood. And the vent buildings, or what we call ancillary structures, we will make a point of making sure that those buildings create vibrant corners where we can include maybe some retail space and activate the space, as opposed to just having blank wall ventilation buildings like has been traditionally done in the past. Stations, of course, if you've seen the Phase 1 stations, are modern, new, bright, open, and airy. And we've achieved on Phase 1, and we expect to achieve similar results in reducing crowding on the adjacent stations at the Lexington Avenue line. So our project status. In 2017, we began the design and reevaluation of our environmental document for Phase 2 2nd Avenue. We issued 3 contracts. We now have our design contract, a joint venture of WSP and STV. We call that Phase 2 partnership. They started on our preliminary designs. We have to do our environmental reevaluation document. As I mentioned before, the environmental document that was completed in 2004, for lack of a better term, has grown a little stale. So we need to update that. And we've engaged AKRF as our consultant to do that. And we've also brought on board, which is a big lessons learned from phase one, EHCC, East Harlem Community Collaborators, which is our outreach consultant, which will help us, and that's what brought us Hector, thank God, will help us with our interaction and our transparency with the community. It's really a big deal to get started early on that. As part of our design, we've been performing our field investigation. Our goal is to finish our preliminary engineering by the third quarter of this year. We are on schedule for that. We'll complete that environmental reevaluation this year as well, third quarter. FTA is reviewing that. Things are going fairly well with that. And our first contract, which is also another lessons learned, is to start and get out early and start with some advanced utility relocations. Hopefully by a year from now, we could potentially start on relocating some utilities in advance of the station contract work. And then, of course, by the end of this year, we'll start final designs. So we talk about lessons learned a lot. We have to take advantage of lessons learned. We've just spent 10 years in construction basically on building phase one. We have a very similar type of contract in a similar area, in a very dense populated area, old buildings, old utilities, cut and cover construction. So we are out there now performing extensive utility investigations, extensive geotechnical boring investigations, and building inspections to get a head start on what we're going to encounter when we put the major structural and civil tunneling contracts out there. We want to be able to see what we could potentially relocate and identify in advance. We know that there are going to be challenges as we go along with construction. The earlier we know what those are, the better it is for us to be able to solve them and keep the project moving along on schedule. So what do we use that information for? I showed you the alignment a few slides back. Well, this is our what we call our geotechnical profile. On the left-hand side there, again, the green sections were the existing sections of tunnel, but the 106th Street station constructed between those two existing tunnel sections, that we call a cut and cover construction. What that means is it's located in soft ground, in soft earth. So rather than tunnel from underneath, we have to dig from the street down and deck over that and construct that with cut and cover methodologies. Then the 116th Street station, you can see the gray area is rock. That comes up and forms the bottom half of that station. So for that particular station, will also be cut and cover. The only difference is the top of it will be in soil and in soft ground, and we'll have to remove some rock to finish the construction of that station. And we're also removing portions of the existing tunnel that was constructed in the 1970s to accommodate that station. In the 1970s, there was not a plan to construct the station at 116th Street. So that's why now we're going back and removing some of that was constructed then. Then we will launch from the north end, somewhere around 120th Street, we'll launch tunnel boring machines, machines, maybe one or two, we haven't decided that yet. We'll launch and begin tunneling in rock, soil, and sometimes both at the same time, north on north on 2nd Avenue, and then curve onto 125th Street like I had shown before, and then go through the area that will become the 125th Street station. But that will now be located fully in rock, and we'll be able to mine that station as opposed to having to open the street and do that work from up above. Much less disruption to the community, much less disruption from doing it from below. So like I mentioned, we're using the existing sections of tunnels. We're minimizing the surface impacts at 125th Street by mining the station as opposed to doing a cut and cover construction. We've also located the station in a manner that we know we're deep enough below the existing Lexington Avenue station so that we maintain the Lexington Avenue service while we're constructing. Hopefully they won't know that we're actually constructing right under them for much of the work that we need to do. And of course, we're adjusting and selecting our alignment to minimize the impacts up at the street and planning our work so that it goes smoothly and reduces and optimizes the construction and reduces risk. So our station components. Each station will have at least 2 entrances, and they'll have 2 ancillary structures. Those ancillary structures, as I referred to before, those are our event buildings. Years ago, where we had the subway grates on the sidewalk, are no longer part of our current design standards. So if there's a situation where we have to remove smoke from a tunnel or simply provide some ventilation to the tunnel sections or to the stations, we now do it by means of these vent buildings, or ancillary buildings, we call them. Again, all stations will be ADA accessible. They'll have elevators, escalators. The 2 cut and cover stations, 106th and 116th Street, will each have 2 entrances. Both of those entrances will have elevators. It's a departure, or it's a lessons learned and an upgrade from what was done on phase 1, as well as 2 elevators from the mezzanine down to the platform, as opposed to just 1.
Yay.
I mentioned the ancillary structures house our power, air handling, and mechanical equipment. And they remove air, push and pull air through the stations as required. This I just love to show. So people ask questions, why is it so difficult to build what we need to build? Why does it take so long? Why does it take so long to figure out, even before we put a shovel in the ground, what we need to deal with? This shows just a couple of blocks of the existing utility systems that we have to deal with when we construct our cut and cover stations. Not only do we have to deal with all the existing utilities, we need to move them out of the way to be able to construct our structure, our temporary structure first. We have to put a deck on top. We have to maintain traffic, because we can't shut down 2nd Avenue to traffic. So we have to still maintain traffic above. And all of those buildings adjacent to us, some of them were built turn of the century or actually in the 1800s. We have to maintain and protect those buildings as well while we do all of this work. Those utilities, some of them are well over 100 years old. You're talking about 1880, gas mains, water mains, that have to be moved sometimes several times. Replaced, actually, you don't move the old one. Replaced, moved, and then finally restored at the end of when we're done with constructing the station. So over the past year, what we've done primarily in our evaluation or our reevaluation of our environmental document and defining our preliminary designs, we've more precisely located where the stations are actually going and where our ancillary buildings and where our station entrances are going to be located. So those blue dots that you see are the ancillary buildings, and what you notice is that they're usually located at the ends of the stations. And the entrances are located somewhere. You try to get the entrances at around the 3rd points of the stations, and those are those 2 yellow circles. Next. Similarly for 116th Street Station, the 2 ancillary buildings at the ends and 2 entrances there. And then at Lexington Avenue, this is a blow up to show what I was discussing and describing before. That small box is the existing 4, 5, and 6 tunnel. We needed to locate our station and be able to mine it within the confines of where we believe the outline of rock is. So if you think about a mountain underground, That's what we're trying to hit. That gray represents that mountain. So we located the station deep enough so that there's enough rock between Lexington Avenue and the top of our station so that we preserve the service for the Lexington Avenue. But we also minimized the impacts by being able to mine the majority of this station and not have to do the open construction. Now at the 125th Street station, we have Lexington Avenue and Park Avenue. There are 4 existing entrances now at the intersection of Lexington and 125th. 2 of those entrances will be significantly modified and upgraded so that we construct additional capacity to be able to take the ridership for the new 2nd Avenue subway, but also construct subsurface levels to accommodate transfers from the 4, 5, and 6 train to the new 2nd Avenue subway. The latest designs indicate that, in all likelihood, the northwest corner will be that new entrance, and also the southeast corner will be the entrance that accommodates the transfers. There is a significant amount of transfer capacity that we need to create at this station. In the morning, at peak hour, we can have up to maybe 13,000 transfers from the 4, 5, and 6 train getting onto the 2nd Avenue subway southbound queue. Also at the viaduct at Park Avenue, we'll have an entrance to capture any riders that want to come off of Metro North in the morning, which would be the primary mode of primary direction. Get into an entrance under the viaduct. But because we are so deep at the 125th Street station, where our mezzanine is approximately 100+ feet deep, we can't achieve a direct connection directly under the viaduct. We have to move over to the east and further create the different levels of escalators to get all the way down to our mezzanine. So that's why you see another entrance on the southeast corner of Park and 125th. And of course, we have our ancillary buildings, the 2 at the ends of the station, and all the way on the right-hand side, we may or may not, we're analyzing this now, construct another ancillary building to provide some supplemental ventilation in the area where we have the curve between 116th Street and 125th Street. And all the way west, at the end of our tail tracks, we have to provide another ancillary structure to be able to provide some ventilation and some pumping and maybe some power to support the tail track usage. So this slide I love to show. Our ancillary buildings, if any of you have seen them on phase 1, they range in height maybe up to 75, 80 feet. But here on phase 2, the ancillaries can go all the way up to maybe 130+ feet. And what I wanted to show here is, on the right-hand side, we have the ancillary building for a cut and cover station. On the left is ancillary for a mine station. The actual size and volume of what we need in order to house all the mechanical equipment and provide the ventilation is not much different between the mine and the cut and cover. The difference is the cut and cover stations are much higher and much closer to the ground, so the building extends much further up. So you see a taller building for the cut and cover stations at 106 and 116th, but the mine building, the mine caverns, since you have many, many below ground levels, the building itself doesn't expose that much above ground. Partnering with the community. Big lessons learned from phase 1. Yeah. So we've already opened up our community information center on 69 West 125th Street. East, I'm sorry.
East, I was like, what?
I'm west of Park Avenue, that's what's in my mind. Oh, I like that hat.
Thank you.
So, you know, in phase 1, we were years into construction before we opened up the Community Information Center. So the earlier we get out, the more transparent we are, the more we engage the community, the better we are. We have a fully bilingual staff
Actually, I could ask Hector to talk for a couple of minutes about, or a few, say a few sentences about our efforts that he's leading out there in that center.
Yeah, as Tim said, we have a fully bilingual staff. We have a very high-tech community information center, complete with iPad kiosks. The kiosks contain videos and pieces of information that residents and folks coming into the information center could look at. And it details construction methods, the history of the Second Avenue subway, pretty much every aspect that we have for Second Avenue subway construction. And we have a static display, which is a wall on the right side of the center that we change periodically that details where we are, in the project. And the next, as a matter of fact, the next exhibit that we're going to have is going to be building the Second Avenue subway. And we're going to talk about that because, we're obviously not in construction yet, but we want the community to understand what construction entails. So doing that will make it more obvious what's going to happen. In addition to that, we have a very robust outreach project where we reach out to the local schools. We have a bunch of classes that come in and we give them a presentation on the project. And more recently, we integrated a STEM perspective into the presentation because that's what's being taught in local schools. And STEM stands for STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. And they're teaching that to their kids. They want their kids to go into these professions. But the interesting thing about it is that we have those professions within the Second Avenue subway. So we thought it made perfect sense to integrate what they're talking about and what we're actually doing on the Second Avenue subway project. So that's something that we've been doing as well. And more recently, we introduced a pop-up CIC, a pop-up Community Information Center, where we actually go out into the street corners and we've got a big 10 by 10 tent. And we have a table and we give out information and talk to people about the Second Avenue subway because we figured having the CIC at 125th Street was great, but being able to do a grassroots effort and actually go out there and talk to people was a lot better. This way folks would be more receptive and they would say that we're really trying to reach out to them. So those are some of the things that we're doing. I don't know if I missed anything, but Rich, you can jump in if you missed something. Yeah. But I definitely feel that we're doing, before I came to this meeting, we had set up on 106th Street and 2nd Avenue, and it was kind of funny because people, when they see 2nd Avenue subway, MTA, they just come right over and they try to get information. Also, the project has been highly anticipated because construction began in the 70s, so there are folks who say, well, it's about time.
Yes, they did.
Yeah, so there are folks who
some people are still there.
Yes, exactly. So that's one of the first impressions that we get when we talk to people. It's like, oh my God, I thought they were not going to finish this. But that's pretty much, the effort. But the great thing about the CIC is that it was put into place way before the test borings began. So we were able to also put in place a notification program where we actually go out and notify people about the test boring vehicles that are going to be in front of their stores or their businesses or their residents. This way they're not, surprised when they come out. They'll actually know, oh yeah, they alerted us. So we actually leave notices and speak to the folks about what's going to happen about a week or so before it actually happens. From 1 week to 2 weeks, we give a notification about what's going to happen. So that is a change from phase 1, and that was a lesson learned. And I think that that's very helpful because people are more receptive to the ongoing work that's going to happen.
Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah.
So
could we just get an update on the status of funding?
Yeah, and the timing.
And then we do questions
Sure.
after.
Thank you, Ellie.
So we are in New Start's program. So we're in our final year of what we call project development for New Starts. By the end of this year, we complete our New Starts program, and we enter into what the FTA calls our engineering phase, which hopefully by the end of 2020, we should receive a full funding grant agreement from the FTA. Now, we recognize in the administration that's in place now, you can achieve an FFGA, but you're not necessarily getting any funds along with the FFGA. So funding is, I don't have any more information in terms of what will be the pot at the end of that effort. What I can tell you is that the project is fulfilling its goals, it's meeting its goals, it's fulfilling its requirements in order to stay in the program and in order to justify the need for the project and justify the need for the funding.
Edith was first, then
The one complaint I've heard a lot of is people comparing the area of refuge on 2nd Avenue versus the area of refuge at South Wall.
And where?
So Ferry.
So,
South Ferry.
That's what I'm going like,
Sorry.
what?
I'm not awake, people. Which really is considerably different. I mean, you get a sense on 2nd Avenue that you're in like a warehouse. Whereas South Ferry, it was a little more designed, shall we say. And also people have complained on 2nd Avenue that it's very sort of industrial and they don't feel particularly safe in there. Is that something that comes under your purview?
well, we are now designing the new station, so we will take that under consideration as we proceed with the architectural configuration.
It's like a stairwell.
Chris?
Yeah, I'm trying to visualize that between South Ferry, and I do
South Ferry,
understand.
it was a nice white wall. It was very funny because in South Ferry, I actually was told by MTA workers that this was their, this was like their den, that we're not allowed to come in it. So it was sort of funny. So that was sort of the difference between feeling as though you're sitting in a stairwell, gray and dingy, and versus something that they want to use as their man cave.
Okay.
Thank you.
Two things. One, I've been to the 2nd Avenue Information Center, and I did been bringing people. But the one thing on your question about transferring at 125th, you left out two other things. It's not just 13,000; it's more than 13,000. You got the Bronx that come. You have buses that come from the Bronx. You got a bus that comes out of LaGuardia Airport. And the Metro North. You put that together, that's much more ridership.
And we have all that accounted for. What I was referring to are passengers transferring directly from the downtown 4, 5, and 6 within the system, utilizing those transfer cores to get onto the downtown 2nd Avenue subway. So there will be additional, as you mentioned, additional transfers at the street, coming from Metro North, from Park Avenue, coming from the buses, yes, of course, we have that.
Because a lot of that customers now with more accessibility, that's going to be like a definitely accessible hub.
Absolutely.
Because that I can tell you that's going to be even more people getting a chance to transfer not just the 4, 5, and 6 or Metro North, but now the Q train.
And actually, what I also failed to highlight, which I should have, we're designing right now phase 2, but we designed the structure to accommodate the full 4-phase build-out.
Correct.
And forecast what ridership will be in our build-out year. Now, don't quote me whether it's 2035 or 2040, for whenever, anticipating a certain percentage of growth in the neighborhood and ridership. The structure that we design and that we construct now will accommodate the full build-out of all 4 phases, as well as any other potential.
But speaking of full build-out,
Yes.
and then here, this 125th Street station, will it allow for a westward expansion should somebody want the line to go that way at some point?
So, the station itself is a 2-track station with diamond crossovers, interlocking design on each side. So, for 125th Street to operate as a terminal, no problem. For it to operate as a through station, also no problem. What we're also considering,
At one point, there was talk of having it as a 3-track, a terminal, which would sort of indicate you weren't going any further at all, because you...
No, that's actually, the 3-track terminal design had the crossovers necessary to be able to treat that as a through station if there ever was an extension to the west. It's just not as efficient as a two-track
Right.
station. So what we're doing, and this is also something that I could have mentioned, the 2004 preliminary engineering had a three-track station, three-track terminals shown. That was a very wide station. The limits of the station were right on top of the adjacent property lines. And in order to construct that wide of a structure, it would have been very risky to try and do an underground type construction or a mined construction.
It was coming out of the
So,
mountain.
yeah. We needed to do an open cut or cut and cover construction on 125th Street, basically right up against these buildings. So one of the first activities we did when we re-kicked off design was to look at that and see if we could resize the station, realign it, and lower it so that we could mine it, and that we can also provide with a two-track terminal station the same level of service that we were originally intended to provide, which was 30 trains an hour ultimately when we have full four-phase build-out. And that's what we've done now over the last year and a half, was to show that that does work, to locate it so that we can mine it, and then also running the tail tracks. We extended the tail tracks an additional train length each track. The original tail tracks in 2004 were only going to be able to store 4 trains, and because it was a 3-track station, we would have had 1 train also in the pocket. So we had a total of 5 trains in storage for the terminal station with 3 tracks. Because we reduced it to 2 tracks, we lost that capability, and we would have gone down to 4 trains, which we didn't think was beneficial or sufficient. So we just increased the length of the tail track. So now we have 6 trains in storage. Is actually better than what was originally there in 2004. But and I'm sorry, sometimes I give a winded answer. We're positioning those tunnels to make sure that if in the future there ever is the desire to go to the west, the tunnels are located in an alignment that would allow for a future island platform between the tunnels. We have to look at the elevation and the profile to see that the tail tracks are level enough to act as tail tracks efficiently, but also if a station were to be constructed in that area, maybe, we are going under Lenox Avenue. We're going under the 2 and 3 now for our tail tracks. In the future, that may become the location for a
Tail tracks are going
station.
that far west?
They're going just west of Lenox.
Wow.
So eventually,
Yeah.
maybe I forgot to turn the machine off and we'll go all the way.
Several
Yeah.
elected officials have expressed the
That would
desire
be
for
so
that line to
nice.
go west and north.
I'd go all the way.
Yeah.
So-
Ellen was next.
Right to Jersey.
Go ahead, Edith.
Okay, I was just, in your presentation, you did say Harlem, Washington Heights. Is that 6,
You did.
7, sometime in the next century?
No, I didn't say Washington Heights. This is community